Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. Hope you're all having a nice week, and thanks for joining us today. This is the fourth webinar in a series of informative sessions we put together to help any audience learn more about digital transformation. The session today will last around about an hour, and we should have time for questions at the end. If you do have any questions throughout, please feel free to add them to the question panel. You should see that in your little toolbar when you hover over your screen. Also, if you want to leave your question till the end, feel free to unmute yourself and we can answer any questions then. We try to make these sessions as collaborative as possible and are always delighted to answer any questions on the webinar, or feel free to contact us offline. So today, I'm just going to briefly introduce Zudu first of all, and then we'll crack on with the content of the webinar. The Zudu, first of all, we're a digital agency, full service agency. We focus on development and marketing. So we've had the pleasure of working with clients, mostly in the UK, but international clients in the US, China, and Europe as well. So over the years, we've built quite a number of different platforms, and ranging from lots of different industries and lots of different sectors and regions as well. So yeah, we're happy to bring some of our experience to the table today and talk about developing a minimum viable product strategy for your website or app or web app. So today I'm going to be presenting. First of all, I'm the managing director of Zudu. I founded the company 7 years ago, and then I'm going to pass on to Craig, who's going to walk you through what a typical app development journey looks like. So just to highlight some of the recent projects we've been working on, we've worked on the likes of workplace engagement apps that help buildings engage with their local area. Also including stuff like NFC and door access controls as well. We've worked on personal fitness apps, social media apps that help influencers connect, payments and invoicing, and we've worked on quite a number of fintech apps as well that have payment processes in the back end. Tour guiding, we've worked on some interesting GPS activated apps for regions that highlight audio guides as you're driving about the countryside, and also local sports club apps as well, building software as a service solutions for companies that deliver apps into sports clubs. But we do work across a wide range of different industries, not just those mentioned here. And typically day to day we get many inquiries from people looking to build solutions, and then we're just there to support them tech wise on developing and specifying that solution. So first of all, what is a minimum viable product? Effectively, that's known as a standalone product that has all the basic features of what you might expect from an app. So we commonly use this strategy to really focus in on a phase one development project. So ultimately, what that means is that you're developing the kind of core features of what you want your end goal to look like, and by doing that, you're ultimately achieving a lower time frame and also a lower cost as well for that phase one, getting a product to market faster. and gaining from the user feedback loop there as well. So, typically an MVP, it will lead with the app's unique selling point. So really, when you're developing an MVP strategy, you want to think about what makes that app, have a purpose. And from there, an example there is a text-to-speech messaging app introducing picture messages. That could be a core feature that you focus on developing that as a core MVP product, first of all, and then testing it out with your users or going and raising funding. Then after that, what you can do is you build other features into the app. So what is a minimum viable product? Essentially, that will allow you to build your app faster and also attract early adopters of a concept, of an idea. These users can provide valuable feedback that can be used to refine the product and introduce new features later on in the development stages. So if you really home in on this MVP strategy, it can really be a very good tool to save you time and money, and also get feedback from your early adopters of the product as well, and feed that into the development process for future versions of the solution. So in order to form your MVP strategy, you need to have some ideas about what the product is, first of all. You want to focus on that main goal, which would be serving the core value of what you're trying to achieve in that particular app. And then there might be some features surrounding that. So the main aspect is concentrate on that, tailor and home in on that core requirement of the app, and then you might put some features around that to make it more appealing to customers. So in some instances, the MVP can also be used to showcase your business potential to stakeholders and investors. And we've helped many clients develop this initial kind of phase one product and then take it to investors, and then they go for fundraising and then develop future phases. And that fundraising might be used to build an internal team, or we might support on that future development as well. There's lots of different ways to skin a cat, really. So in terms of your MVP strategy, the first step really is to identify and understand your business, what the business purpose is and the market needs, looking at your long-term goals and success criteria. So really, with that, it's a business, potentially this product is a business in its own right, or it might be a product for your own business to make that more efficient, for example, or it might be a customer-facing app. Ultimately, you want to refine what those long-term goals look like and tie that into your kind of phase one product strategy. Then you want to think about mapping out the user journeys. So ultimately, when we're building platforms from the get-go, we're looking at what the user types are, and then how functions relate to those individual user types. So you might have, for example, 3 players in your system. You're usually going to have a super admin user, and then you might have other players in the general user, and then some other admin or manager user in there. Typically that's the first place to start from a product design perspective, and thinking about, okay, what do I need to do in the system? What does this other user need to do with the system? And how do they interact with the app? Then you want to really think about considering the actions and story endings for each user. So you can develop user stories. So that's this user wants to do a certain thing on that app, and then from there you can develop kind of core system requirements off the back of that. So that works very well in an agile development process, and it's something that developers like us really understand as well. So we also use tools like MOSCO. So that stands for must have, should have, could have, and won't, to help clients achieve that kind of phase one approach. So they might have a whole list of this is my ideal scenario of what my app might look like in phase 3 or 4, and that's great to have that long-term plan in mind. But ultimately, if you take this MOSCO approach, what you can do is break down those requirements and really concentrate on kind of what will make your app a success from square one. And that helps developers like us as well understand what could that phase one look like, and we can try and paint you down that road of that minimum viable product. Also, it's really important to identify your user and also business needs. A key part of any app development process really is kind of speaking to the key stakeholders of the system and making sure that what you're building is right for them. We always recommend, we have app development questionnaires, and we work with organizations like the NHS as well to do kind of community interest groups and focus groups across lots of different demographics. So we're very used to kind of helping clients along that journey of painting what that ideal picture looks like. And it's very important to do that if you're considering going into a large development project or developing your own software as a service business. It's very important to understand the needs of users, and not always just presume that you know what they want. So things like just putting out a free questionnaire using a kind of questionnaire software, or joining business networking events as well, asking these stakeholders whether they would use the app and getting feedback. That can be a core piece of the process as well. We also have certain stages. We can break the project down into workshops and wireframing and designs, or prototyping, just to try and gauge an interest from people. Sometimes people react to things that are a lot more visual, so we can design a few screens of the app just as a one-off exercise, so you can take that to stakeholders to get feedback. And as I mentioned, it's really important to identify your long-term goals. An example here is a coffee shop chain looking to reduce checkout time by 30%. And that's, that could be classed as a long-term goal. That's what they're looking to achieve from technology. And then from there, you want to kind of paint your success criteria. So you might think your success criteria is, reaching that 30% time to checkout reduction. You could have 100,000 active monthly users on the platform, and also reaching 1 million in monthly transactions via the app. So it's very important to, measure that success. You're building a product because it wants to achieve something. And ultimately, there needs to be some ROI behind that as well. And it might not necessarily be monetary. You might have other ROI, like to increase efficiency, for example. But it's very important from square one to understand what success looks like for you. So just to touch on a few different technologies before I hand over to Craig. The apps can be built in lots of different ways. We build kind of both native, cross-platform and web apps. And we also work with a lot of third-party tools as well to build the products that we do. So ultimately, it's quite an important decision from square one. Native apps, for example, that's built in Swift for iOS and Java for Android. And there's also other kind of operating systems as well out there, like Huawei. So it's important to think about that from square one. Your native apps are, we build native apps more commonly for products that have a lot of device interaction going on. So they might use those device features. And that's quite, it's also more expensive as well, because we need to develop in 2 different coding frameworks. So it's something to keep in mind. Some developers only develop native apps as well. So, it's good to get a kind of idea of other people's opinions as well, from the get-go, because this is a decision that can ultimately result in much more ongoing costs for building and then managing and maintaining that app ongoing. We also do cross-platform apps. So that's when you kind of build once and push across 2 platforms at the same time. So we build in technologies like React Native or Angular, or Flutter. So these technologies allow us to build in one framework, and we push across both iOS and Android at the same time. We've also got web apps, and quite often what you'll find is a lot of platforms have a mix of mobile app and web app. So you might have your super admin user on the web app, and then you've got your mobile apps, for the general user. But then some apps are just mobile apps, and then some apps are just web apps as well. So it's an important consideration, and ultimately you want to think about how people would interact with that platform. What kind of visibility do you want? Mobile apps tend to be more for functionality in your pocket. Web apps tend to be more accessible and used for kind of work. If someone's in a working situation, typically they're sat down at a computer or a laptop, and that might be a slightly easier way to build the platform as well. You tend to find with web apps as well, it gets a lot more kind of search visibility as well. So you'll be visible on search engines like Google. With mobile apps, you can do stuff like App Store optimization, but typically with a mobile app, if you just built a mobile app, you probably need a website to go alongside that to promote the product. So yeah, that's it for the first bit. So I'll hand over to Craig to talk about the process.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks, James. And just really to add to that, why are we putting so much emphasis on, this MVP, this strategy, trying to form an MVP, as per what James has kind of run through there. I think a key point there was the success criteria that you would be trying to set for your system, for your project that you have a vision for people listening. And it's really so that you are landing on the right track. You want to go down the avenue that appeals to the users that will want to interact with your app, with your web app, etc. So these sort of materials that we're going to run through are a bit more of the specifics of that. And these are things I would argue as well are things to look at now, because you don't need to worry really about, as of now, people listening, you may not actually have an app that exists on the App Store yet. You may not have a particular landing page to get to yet. So we've got a real opportunity here to establish, okay, what exactly are we developing? What is it going to, who is it going to be for? And how are they going to interact with the system? So once you kind of can cross those hurdles and easily answer those questions and justify why, you're going to have a much better chance of launching an app that appeals to the demographic, to the users that you want to reach out to, particularly in those early phases, you know, when reviews are important, when the feature set is important. That's kind of what we're really trying to nail down here. So yeah, and just to kind of jump into the user journey specifically, so we've got a really nice example on the right. One I always like to go to is your sort of Deliveroo apps now, and they've far more common now since COVID, I would argue as well. Essentially being the sort of trigger being that you're hungry, you know, you want something to eat, it's late, you haven't had tea yet. What are the actions, what are the interactions that need to occur in order for you to receive that product, that the food at your door, so that would then satisfy you as a customer. And it's those actions in between, as far as looking at menus, scanning menus, selecting a restaurant. Perhaps I might go through a user journey where I remove an item because actually I don't want that, I'd go for something else. Those sort of directions that you could be led down are very much unique scenarios. So the more you can establish, the better, and the more understanding you can get about how someone might interact with your system without really having to consider anything like technical limitations or anything. You know, you can approach this as far as how you want users to interact with your system, and that will help you determine the best way to get that data, that information in front of them at the right moment, when it comes to designing the app, when it comes to wireframing the app down the line. So yeah, with your business goals in mind, it's now time to consider your client's goals. As we said, user journey is a series of steps that represent how a user may interact with your app to complete a task, placing an order, or booking a table. Another great example. User journey should always be based on research and data. So it's quite anecdotal there with my experience, and we all have our own experiences and how we might interact with the system. I'm sure if you were to speak to family members, they might have the same apps as you, but they might actually interact with it in a completely different way, or have expect different results even to yourself. So where you can, it's important to assess how others, a broader audience, interact with such a system and how they might interact with your system as well, to remove, of course, your perceptions and bias, so you're not really just centralized on, oh, this is how I would use the app. You've got to really think about how your users and how the market you're targeting are going to interact with your system. What expectations do they have now? How tech savvy are they? You know, these are things to consider as well. For example, you may be targeting an older audience, and so that's important to ensure that they have no drop-off points. They don't drop off of this particular user journey. And that will help you identify, look at this particular action, user pre-books usual table. That's where we're starting to identify drop-off, and how can we ensure that we don't end up with a lost journey. You want them to reach that end goal. That's really your main objective here. So yeah, that's a great task that can really, it's useful for us. We can help with that, and it's something well worth generating or thinking about for sure. Even if you don't have an app right now, you know, if you have a vision, as James says, you've got business goals. This is a great first step to just identify and translate for even developers what exactly the system is supposed to do, because not everyone will have an understanding quite as yourself or as your team straight away. So the quicker you can translate your vision in these ways, the quicker the development will be as well, I guess. So we'll just move on to the next slide, just look at some other examples. Yep, so here's some more materials as well that you can generate. So user personas, really diving deep into the type of individuals and fleshing those out. But it's important to just mention that, you know, you're not trying to draw up a real person, because creating personas provide an opportunity to be specific about your users and conduct research about the real life needs and motivations. User personas shouldn't be specific to individuals, but rather a fictional portrayal of a segment or demographic within your target audience. So I think a really good point on these examples with Eleanor, you know, we have specifics of what their job title might be, their salary. And then the really interesting part is, if you look at the motivations and pain points, they're not identical, and that's kind of what you're trying to establish. You know, you're not designing a system for one person, but you're designing a system for people with many different thoughts and feelings about what their needs, desires are to be bothering to interact with your system. But if you notice even the pain points there, so no coffee shops nearby offer loyalty discounts, and for the second one, most coffee shops do not allow you to pre-book tables. So again, they're maybe seeking different things from your app as well, and this really helps you identify this, and it really helps you start to identify, if you haven't already, who your target audience might be, to kind of force yourself to try and group them together into these personas, multiple personas. And also that translates really well for anyone who joins your product, your project, to understand, look, who are we targeting here, and what might their concerns be, what might they be looking for, etc. So it's a really good starting point as well for what will be, I think, the next slide, user types. But we'll jump to the next slide. Yes. So defining user types, I'll just run through. User types can open the door to those who are less technically minded but have hands-on experience that can contribute to the creation of your app. And this is one of the first tasks we run through, particularly when we're in conversation with clients, is trying to establish, okay, who are the user types of this system and what does that mean? So a user type, to give you an example, could be, it's very common to have almost a general user, and to have more as well admin user types. So you could have a super admin or an admin. And as you can maybe imagine, if I was using Twitter, I would probably be considered a general user, logging in, being able to tweet, being able to upload images, direct message people. Those features are available to me on that system as a general user. However, there may be more of an admin panel that we're not actually aware of. It's actually more appropriate for the internal business, the people within, and that would maybe provide features such as providing data analytics and the ability to, for example, user management. They may have like people who are using the system, general users who are using the system incorrectly. So an admin or a super admin needs to be able to get access to a portal and remove that user from the system, find them, remove them. That's just sort of establishing feature sets for different types of user types. So a good point here as well is it helps you identify how different categories are interacting with the system and what is essential for your minimal viable product. Because as a general rule, the more user types you have, of course, the more features you're going to have, the more views, the more front end designs that you might have to generate for those different categories of user types. So the lower you can keep that for the MVP is a better maybe way to keep costs down. But again, some user types absolutely may be essential. It's very common for fitness apps to have, for example, a trainer view, a trainer user type, where they can actually generate said content for their more general users who are interested in fitness. And those sort of feature sets to be limited or certainly not accessible to user types that are lower in the hierarchy. There tends to be quite a hierarchy established as well. For example, a super admin would very much be the highest user type that can access all avenues of systems typically. So yeah, and when defining user types for your app, it's important to consider the relationship between user types, as this will allow you to visualize how the app will look and feel. So that's me there again talking about the hierarchy, and it also helps establish, well, what's important for that particular user type. The mobile experience, for example, may be far more important for the general users, whereas the admin sort of user type, they would actually prefer the more desktop experience, and we would probably consider a web app as an alternative, and you can fit far more data analytics on your laptop screen, of course, than your mobile. So it really depends, and that's those sort of questions, those considerations really establish what your needs are for your idea, for your product, you know, so that it's at its best, and hopefully you might start to see some features maybe of higher importance than others, as far as what I've discussed there. So prioritization might come into your mind. So, you know, it's one thing to have, you know, it's easy to say I want to push an app to the store that has everything, and that's great, but, you know, established products do take a little bit of time and consideration as to what features are appropriate for who. So defining user types is a great starting point for that sort of thinking as well. So hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, and then just to jump ahead as well, you can also, with sort of what we've talked about, you can then start to establish a product roadmap. This is a high-level visual that shows the evolution of your app over time, including timescales for deliverables and any associated milestones included. So if you're sitting there, you don't have an app yet, you don't have a web app yet, it probably would be a good idea to establish or insert into these sort of fundamental wireframes and designs that might be appropriate so that we can get closer to that launch point. But the product roadmap can still exist once your MVP is established as well, which is why it's so important. So you could sort of isolate really big, epic key features that you want to have on your product so that you can be, for example, more competitive with maybe apps that are similar to you. So you may want to have, for example, a common one could be video live streaming. So quite a lot of technical resource may be required to keep that up and running. So it might not be an essential thing for your MVP, but it's certainly one of your end goals you want to establish later down the line. And that's something that you can include a little bit further down the product roadmap if it's not essential for your day one, but certainly essential within, you want that in the next 200, 100 days, for example. You maybe aren't quite clear how that is established, but you can put it on the roadmap, and then your team can dig in, we can dig in and understand how exactly will this work. So you're not doing absolutely everything up front as far as, going from zero to competing with the sort of big tech apps. You want to be realistic with your roadmap as well. So yeah, we'll move to the next slide. And yeah, just as well, super useful materials here. So this is called, James has mentioned this as well, Moscow requirements. The product roadmap also lets us identify your Moscow requirements. So it's quite sequential as far as generating these materials and help you with the next ones. And in this particular example, this is where, as I mentioned before, the thinking of prioritization of your features really comes into play, because it's establishing these 4 columns, and that's essentially what Moscow stands for. So your must-haves, your should-haves, your could-haves, and your won't-haves. So of those sort of features and ideas and ways in which your users are interacting with the system, it's kind of asking you to put those into categories as far as which ones are the most important for your product, forcing you to think of prioritization and really establish, for example, your must-haves would suggest that these are absolutely essentials that need to be in this product for live. Otherwise, we don't have a product that's going to satisfy our users on day one. That's kind of what that slot is. So anything in there is absolutely needs to be developed for that certain deadline. But when you're looking more at your should-haves and could-haves, you're really slotting in features that could maybe come a little bit further down the line. They're not absolutely essential. And they can be developed in future. Same with your sort of could-haves, desirable features, but by no means as important as the previous category. And won't have is almost like that bin at the side, just to think, well, actually, of these features, they're not critical, they're not important for sure, and actually I would maybe consider not having them, even though we thought they were a good idea as far as this brainstorming process or establishing the previous materials. Actually, maybe our users don't need that of our user types, and you can kind of slot that bullet point of a feature in the won't have column. So, and this is essential for, I would argue, for sticking to an MVP strategy, so that you're sticking to your constraints, your budget. Obviously, the less features that you isolate and say to a team that you need, the less costs associated with that, and you've kind of become more lean. And that's a good thing as well, because you don't want your app or your web app to do absolutely everything, and it's that arguably is going to be a little bit confusing, particularly for a new product or entity coming onto the market. You want that to be clear to your users as quickly as possible. They are very much going to be early adopters. You are going to be a new name, perhaps a new brand as well. So there's those hurdles that you want to cross. So the more lean you can be, you could argue, and the better your features, your essential features, are going to be, because you're going to have more time to iron those out in the right manner and have more time to establish, okay, I want the user journey for those individuals to be this, particularly for the must-haves as well. It's one thing to list a feature, it's another to consider the user experience as well. So just quickly as well, I did make mention to wireframes and designs. When creating your app, it's important to map out the basic features before diving into the full design stages. Low fidelity prototypes are often basic sketches. You can see examples on the right there, and do not allow any user interaction. And they are designed to show where elements should go during later stages. And then eventually, I guess with those, a good point to make is the wireframes can really represent your feature set very well. Particularly if you're going down a front end led approach, you're not as, the back end of your system needs to work, of course, but your front end needs to have all the features, or at least access to those features for your user types. And that's where wireframes can really come in handy, because it just gives people a really good idea on where things should be laid out. You're not necessarily considering colors and whatnot at that stage. You're just making sure the features are there. That's your sort of milestone that you're trying to hit. And the user experience, the flow really comes together, because you can actually start to navigate screens much like the app will, or the web app will become. So it really starts to flesh out a lot of what has really been in writing so far. Really, it starts to make things come alive without you having to go wild with them. The cost can still remain low at this point, because you're not actually developing legitimate code or screens. You're just representing them effectively with hotspots, and that can still be maintained on the high fidelity designs. That's very much where designers really come in. So any sort of design ideas or how you want things to look can be subjective, but also can be considered for market research, and who, if you've, as I said, you've got a target audience, there may be a certain way you want to show off your app and how it looks, the branding, the logo, all essential parts, so that it's easily recognizable as well. That's kind of users know where they are when they're on your system. They know that they're not confused. I guess that's a really good point for the early adopters as well. So and all those designs can occur without any programming kicking into effect as well. At Zudo, we often produce a high-level interactive prototype, as I said. That includes most or all app screens as part of the design process for any app project. This prototype helps us visualize different versions of the colors, branding, as I said, and functionality without making code changes, just what I said before. So it also allows us to test process flows and make tweaks throughout the development stage. So really starting to make these things come alive, and any sort of issues with the flow can really be identified at this point as well, because you can start to assess and test really well, as if it was a real app or web app. So super useful, I would argue. Yeah. So just jump to the next point. And just so you're aware, this is kind of broadly, if we would take a step back and argue, okay, we're taking an MVP strategy, that's great. We have two sort of main methodologies that are as going against each other as far as what approach you might want to take. We've been quite sequential in how we've pitched what we're generating in the previous slide. So that would be more of a traditional waterfall methodology, where we're doing things one step at a time. Once a certain area is complete, for example, designs, we just consider there all the design screens. Then you can see the code coming after that point. So you've got really conclusive milestones in that particular methodology. It's just worth considering as well, Agile has become more and more popular, and is particularly popular with bigger systems, with systems that require continuous integration, continuous development, i.e., we've got so many established apps now on the App Store, but you may notice they come out with particular updates quite frequently, more and more, with new features or new ways to do this. Or actually, Facebook started to introduce the more Snapchat-like features because they didn't acquire Snapchat. That would be maybe considered a bit more of an agile development, where things are sort of, the system exists, but you're really sort of developing features. You're focusing in on features a lot more, and you're doing the particular design of that feature, the development, the testing, and the deployment back into the main system, the entire system, and a lot more of a contained, isolated process. So that would be something like a typical, you would typically have 2-week sprints as well for that. So things really pick up the pace and can be deployed a lot quicker. But as you can see with this circle, everything is being fitted in within that 2 weeks. So you obviously you couldn't do an entire app maybe in a 2-week sprint, of course, but you can develop all these materials, the designs, develop, test, procedure much quicker, and it just allows really for a lot more flexible development. So you are sort of maybe paying a bit more for the resource to constantly be associated with your product, but you can really shift gears a lot more easily, and you can develop features a lot more quickly, maybe in certain scenarios as well, rather than having to wait for the entire analysis, entire designs to really come to the end point. So it works really well with live projects. You can still use that methodology as well for development of these waterfall, more traditional, from zero to having a live app scenarios as well, where you're really just piecing things together. And sometimes that can be really valuable as well, depending on the feature sets that you might identify. There might be some technical aspects, for example, I think BTE communication with other sort of hardware devices that are really technical and you want to get over that hurdle. That's where Agile development can really pay off, because you can start to isolate and understand and get past hurdles a lot quicker without having to wait months or weeks and weeks just to kind of cross a hurdle late in the game. You know, you can be flexible that way. So hopefully that makes sense as well. And yeah, it's important to maybe consider at this point what your preference is and what's appropriate for you, and we can obviously advise on that as well, as far as where and when each methodology might be more appropriate, or maybe a bit of a blend might be appropriate as well for particular stages. So yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Greg. I'll just finish off with the last slide here, which is just some top tips from us, the do-dos and do-don'ts of app development. So I guess, first of all, we'd always recommend, ensure your app is fully tested from the perspective of each user type, or tested by real users outside your team. When we're developing products, it's very important that user acceptance testing phase is extremely important for the product to be adopted by users. And if you only consider that internally and you don't open that up to the stakeholders of the system or wider demographics, then you can be faced with real problems when you launch. You just make assumptions on what people want, and then it gets launched and you find out that people use systems in different ways. So with our development process as well, it's very flexible. So we're trying to ultimately, for that system to be launched, we want it to be, first of all, an MVP, but also as perfect as it possibly can be to take it to market, and also build on top of that. And also we have an acceptance phase as well. So just making sure that people, after the product's launch, we treat that as full development for 6 more weeks, just to kind of take the pressure off launch. So, if you're looking at onboarding users, still getting feedback after you've launched the web app or the mobile app, it's possible for you to do that while it's live in the store and still have our support thereafter. After that, we can also provide, aftercare, optimization, and hosting as well. So, we can be there to support the product thereafter. And that's an important piece of the puzzle as well, is make sure that, the person that you're working with can be there to support the app. It's very hard for us to work with technology that's been developed by someone else. And the reason is that, things can be developed in many different ways. We have our SLAs that we need to adhere to, and quality standards. So, when sometimes we look at stuff, if it's not being developed or someone's fallen out with a developer, then it's passed to us. It's sometimes quite challenging to work with that. And sometimes you ultimately have to start again. So it's important to make sure you're doing things right from the get-go, and also you've got a company who can support you thereafter. as well. I'd also suggest making the most of your OS features, so optimizing accessibility and user experience. So that's really important. Also, the OS operating system varies from iOS to Android and web as well. So, and things work on different ways on all these different devices that you're accessing on. So it's important to consider that in terms of, how people are using the app, where they're using it. And, you might end up as I said, building a mobile app when in reality, most of your users are desktop users. So it's important to think about that operating system and also the devices people are accessing on. Also start testing your app from the first build and test it on multiple devices. We do QA testing on our side, but we also provide builds as we go and develop in a very agile manner as well. So, what we require from the client is to make sure that we're going in the right direction. Because again, the client, we need to make sure we're achieving the client's vision, and also they need to make sure they're achieving, and we need to make sure we're achieving all the stakeholders' visions as well. So very important to do QA testing and and user acceptance testing as well on the client side. Also, so the do don'ts, I guess, avoiding inconsistencies in the design or navigation of the app. Sometimes people can, home in on a mobile app concept and then overcomplicate it. So, the whole idea of a mobile app is for it to be as simple and usable as it possibly can be. So you're always trying to achieve the least amount of clicks to get people to where they want to go. And some people end up creating these kind of lengthy processes. That's part of our job as well, to advise people down a path of least resistance with customers and users, creating user journey flows and wireframes and designs, just to make sure that's as usable as it possibly can be. Also, don't underestimate the importance of marketing. So, some clients will build products and they'll just expect it to be instantly popular. It doesn't work that way. You need to put marketing behind products to make it a success. So no matter how great the product is, you always need to do that marketing. You need to have a plan post-launch. It might just be an app for your company internally, and you need to onboard users, your staff, for example, or it could be a customer-facing app, and that requires marketing to make money. And ultimately, if an app's just sitting on the app store, or we've pushed it to a web app, it's not going to be instantly visible to people unless you put some marketing power behind that. The last one there is just try to avoid forcing your users into new routines. I'd always say, if it is a new process, you need to make it as simple as it possibly can be. And the more explanation you need, the less intuitive that product is. So you shouldn't be having to write big reports or info buttons about what this function does, because it should be so intuitive that you can just use it anyway. So at the same time, there are some systems that are slightly more complex, and it's good to support that with documentation and FAQs and stuff like that. But at the same time, it should be nice and simple to use. So designing something with your stakeholders in mind and making sure that you know what they're looking for, very, very important. And that's very, very important in the early stages as well of the project. Great. So that's the end of the webinar today. if anyone has any questions, feel free to fire ahead. Feel free to unmute yourself as well if you want to ask any questions. Hope you enjoyed the webinar. I would also say, feel free to get in touch with us at any point. We're on LinkedIn. Feel free to give us a buzz, or visit the website, put in an inquiry, or just get in touch via email as well. More than happy to answer anyone's questions, and also offer any support on projects.
So there is one question, James. So I'll just read that one out. How long does it normally take to research the app and then code it, etc.? So research and then the sort of design integration, I would say. I would just quickly, before you answer, at least from clients that I've experienced, I've had some clients do put more emphasis on research than others. But what is a good thing is to, once you start to produce the materials that we've sort of laid out, those are the moments that you can really touch base with your potential audience, for research, whether it's quantitative or qualitative. And as far as the amount, at least from my position, there's no minimum or maximum limit that we would say, but we want the research to influence the procedures or the designs, for example, quite strongly. So when you have established wireframes, for example, and when you have established designs, things such as focus groups can be a really smart idea, really just to get people to circle around, get opinions, get a sense of what their initial thoughts are even. That can be a really good starting point for research as far as, are you going in the right direction? And if do we need to change course? Those are really good touch points. But you could maybe introduce people earlier as well. But yeah,
absolutely, yeah. Just to add to that as well, I guess it can take, apps can come in all shapes and forms. So it can take a very long time to research kind of complex theories and systems, but it can also take a very quick, short amount of time to develop quite an intuitive product that is trying to do a relatively simple thing. So again, it's kind of how long's a piece of string. But I guess on the research side, it's always important to kind of come to the table if you've got a project there, knowing what you're looking for, having researched the market quite thoroughly. And even when you're developing it as well, as Craig said, you can bring in focus groups and stuff like that. So in terms of coding, typically, you're looking at, at least a few months in terms of kind of wireframing and design, and then you're on to the development, and then QA testing and launch. So it's similar to building a house, for example. You need good designs in place. You need to employ an architect to do the drawings, and without all those pieces of the puzzle in place, the house is going to be built on sand with the wrong materials. So ultimately, it is a process that needs to go through. Although the end product might appear quite simple, there's probably a lot of effort and coding that goes into the back of it, and a lot of building blocks that go into any system. So in terms of the coding side, yeah, again, that's the main bulk of what it is that we do, but also the research side is also quite important. I'd say, if you had to average it out, most MVPs might take 4 to 6 months, to get it from the concept stage all the way through to launch. I think we've got one more question there. So just mention, is it quicker to create a web app versus a mobile phone app? So I'd always say, yeah, web apps are typically easier to build in an iterative process. So if you're building a web app, it's much easier to push code to live. So with an MVP, sometimes or quite often they might start with a web app, and then their kind of final solution is to move that into a mobile app form. And there's also things called progressive web apps, which are a sort of hybrid between a web app and a mobile phone app. I would say, but I would caveat that with, typically web apps tend to be more functional. If you're using a laptop, there's lots of kind of interactions going on there, some inputting of data, output of data, analytics. Sometimes mobile apps can be quite intuitive. So, that's where you can kind of home in on a very simple mobile app for your MVP and make it very intuitive from square one. So, there have been occasions where, we've built mobile apps much, much faster than we would do with the likes of a web app. Brilliant. I think that's everything, all the questions. So if no one's got any more questions, thank you very much for joining us today. And I hope you enjoyed the webinar, and hope you have a great week. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.